My name is Brian Benz. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and today I'm just going to talk about Microsoft open source. I'm going to show you some of our latest efforts with GitHub Actions and Codespaces in a quick demo at the end as well. So let me get started with that. All right. So this is a bit of a review for me for sure, but for a lot of people as well. We have a mission of empowering every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. It's printed on our badges. It's all over the place at Microsoft. And it's something that we have as a common goal around the 100,000 plus people who work worldwide at Microsoft. Our ambition is to reinvent productivity and business processes, build the intelligence cloud platform, and create more personal computing. You know, and I gotta say, it's pretty impressive what's happened so far. I really have to give kudos to the senior management at Microsoft. You know, I joined Microsoft in 2012, and I joined this group called Microsoft Open Technology. And what we did was help internally and a little bit externally work with organizations inside Microsoft and help them see the benefits and value of open source. And that's harder than you think, because if you think about it back then, you know, 10, 15 years ago, Microsoft was, their bread and butter was licenses and delivering boxes of software. And they had to switch not only to a services company, but an online company as well, using the cloud, so using their own stuff. And I really have to give it kudos to Microsoft. I couldn't even fathom how they did this, but they were able to transition to open source services company from basically a closed source licensing company in a fairly short amount of time, and we're extremely successful. If you think of all the dangers, are you going to cannibalize your own software? You know, you go and you talk to a guy who's responsible for a product that makes $1 billion a year, and you tell him he's going to fundamentally change the way that product works and the way the whole organization works. That's scary stuff, you know, and obviously he's going to be protected. But in 2014, Satya Nadella made it official and you know, directed all engineers to open source internally, and we've done a lot. We were massive contributors to GitHub, which I'll talk about later. But now it's just part of our daily business. So we did create some guiding principles. We actually have a Microsoft open source code of conduct, and I'm going to share a link to that later on in the presentation. But really, it boils down to being responsible with open source, be transparent, making sure that we're innovating, and we're actually sharing some of our innovations as well, and respecting the communities that have built some of the key pieces of software that everyone uses in the world. So open source for us in the cloud is really about enabling. We've been working with Linux for a long time, as Ron mentioned. You know, we've done some acquisitions as well. We integrate really well with products and services that are already out there. And we release Microsoft technologies in the open source domain. If you go out to the GitHub, and I'll share a link later, our GitHub for Microsoft is a ton of links out there and a ton of open source code that you can take and use, and we accept PRs on all of them as well. Those are pull requests for those of you who might not be familiar with GitHub. And we also participate in communities and contribute to open source projects that are already out there. On top of all of that, while we're working with open source, we also worked hard to become the most trusted cloud. So we have a large amount of domestic and international certifications. We partner with organizations that help deliver those certifications. So pretty much any compliance needs you have or anything like that, we've already maintained and created certifications on most of our services. And there's a link at the end. I'll show you where you can go and find out specific compliance and certifications that we've got for different pieces of software. So to combine all of that, we've got open source, and we've got a really trusted cloud, and we've got some really, really good responses in the press. You know, over the years, these are some of the things that you might see, you know, 60% plus of images on Azure Marketplace are now Linux-based. What else? I mean, if you look at our own internal VMs, we use a lot of Linux internally. In fact, the demo I'm going to show you today is running on a Linux container that allows you to run your code directly from GitHub. And investors like us as well. The stock price, I can't complain. It's gone up about 5 times since I joined, which I think is just 100% credit to myself, of course. And it's been an amazing ride with the stock price for sure. It's definitely something to consider if you're looking for investments. It's I would recommend it myself. There you go, getting stock tips in my presentation today. Anyway. How do we do all this with open source? So we contribute our own open source. We built open source projects. We also partner with open source organizations and communities. And Ron earlier mentioned Kubernetes. Yes, one of our corporate vice presidents is Brendan Burns. He's the co-creator of Kubernetes and is one of the main driving forces behind our Kubernetes efforts internally at Microsoft and for the services we provide as well.
Hello.
Yes. Ron?
Yeah, I
you?
want to make sure everything's going smooth for you.
Okay. Yeah, I hope so. I hope everyone can hear me. And I'm just blabbering away. You know, it's always kind of fun when you're doing these presentations. I've got my slides up. I'm looking at the screen and I'm just talking into the ether. So I hope everyone can hear me. The chat is open if you want to ask any questions, but it is a 30-minute presentation, so I'm going to go through this pretty quick, and then I'm going to show a real quick demo.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, thanks. All right, so we got a partnership with a lot of organizations. We've been working with Jenkins over the time. We provided them some infrastructure a few years ago to actually build Jenkins on Azure. We also work with pretty much every one of these companies that you see here, these companies and or brands. When I joined Microsoft in 2012, we were working very closely with the Apache Foundation, and we actually hired the president of the Apache Foundation, Ross Gardler, and I've been working with him for years as well. But we were contributing back. That was sort of our trial balloon, if you will, contributing back to Apache projects, and now we contribute back to pretty much all the projects that you see here that have open source options. So. Cool. So is it mission accomplished? Not so fast, not really. We actually have a lot more to do, and it's just an ongoing process. It's just part of our business now. It's not something that's like, okay, you know, that open source thing is done now, let's move on to the next project. It's really a really key part of our business all the time. I'm on GitHub daily. Updating my source code and checking projects. I'm going to show you some cool projects later. So a couple years ago, we were working with 3 powerful trends that we had to deal with at Microsoft. Insufficient supply of developers, and 99% of code bases include open source, and companies are struggling to adopt DevOps. So how do you actually help our customers and our partners in all of these areas? And basically the way we did it was buying GitHub. GitHub and Microsoft, I know there was some initial, some people probably saw the press, there was some initial trepidation among open source projects that, oh my God, what is Microsoft doing buying this company? But I think they're happy now. I hope so anyway. We have introduced a ton of features. We've also opened things up. So originally GitHub, you would have to pay if you wanted a private repo or if you wanted a large number of developers accessing your repo. Both those restrictions are gone now. Actually, it's free to have private repos and within a certain amount of users as well. So quite a few open source projects out there are able to run more cheaply than they did before if they have private and or large numbers of users out there. GitHub is huge. It was a no-brainer for Microsoft to buy it, really. 40 million plus developers, 100 million private and public repos. 1 billion contributions per year. And a little bit of a giveaway, a couple of years ago, the GitHub publishes this thing called the State of the Octaverse. You can search it on the web. And a couple of years ago, Microsoft was the largest contributor to that. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Not only were we providing software, well, when I say the largest contributor, I better qualify that. We were the largest contributor of open source on GitHub. So we had more repos, more activity on GitHub than any other entity out there. And a lot of that was our docs. So our docs are actually written in GitHub, and there's some really complicated processes, in fact, that I'm working on this week to build up some docs. We have a whole process that gets put through, and you have to issue PRs if you want to update a doc in Markdown, and that generates a whole bunch of things and comes out as Microsoft Docs. So if you go to docs.com, those are all repos that are on GitHub, and they're open source. And if you don't like what you see in the docs, you can hit the edit button in the docs, and you can actually edit it in GitHub and submit a PR. So that's kind of cool stuff. But we were one of the largest contributors, and we bought GitHub, as I mentioned before, just a no-brainer, because we were using it so much. It just seemed like the right thing to do. The other appeal for us is, GitHub really runs digital transformation. If anybody's moving to the cloud, security and compliance, code to cloud DevOps, team collaboration, and developer talent are the fundamental building blocks that we are actually working to enhance at GitHub as part of our acquisition. So let's talk a little bit about what each of those are. How are we doing for time? Yeah, we're okay. Secure development end-to-end, making sure that there's security and compliance in your open source components, and shifting security left, and bringing expertise of top security resources. We have a massive security force that works with Azure. Those people are also contributing to GitHub's security and compliance as well, and contributing in a real material way. Everyone talks about shifting left, and they talk about DevSecOps, and they talk about shifting security left. What does that actually mean, and why would anyone want to do it? Well, this is a great graph for that. So basically, the idea here is, if you have a vulnerability and it makes it all the way through development, build, test, QA, production, and there's a breach, it costs millions of dollars or more to actually resolve that. However, there have been studies that if you catch a vulnerability at development, it might only cost $80 at build, $240, test QA, you can see the numbers here, $960 or $7,600 in production before it gets to millions. And there are 570 times more developers than security researchers. So how do you actually help developers and the whole organization avoid getting to the breach stage of this life cycle before anything goes bad? Well, there's a few things you can do. Community-powered security and compliance. There are dependency insights you can use, vulnerability management, and some other code analysis that we do as well. I'm going to skip through those, and I'm just going to highlight code scanning in the interest of time today. So code scanning, I personally deal with this all the time. We have scanners that run inside Microsoft that check for secret keys, connection strings, things like that, and warn you and your boss, if you don't resolve it immediately, if there's anything like that in your code. In fact, in Microsoft, it will actually, there's tools internally at Microsoft that will actually obfuscate that code from public view immediately before, hopefully before anything happens to it. Also, if you're generating any docs, as I mentioned before, they go through GitHub, they go through a process, and one of the tests and checks we have is checking for secret keys and things like that. So we have really, really good and robust automatic dependency and vulnerability checking that really, really helps. You can also automate things across the software development lifecycle. You can accelerate delivery with CI/CD, and this is a big part of this is really built into GitHub Actions. we have a product at Microsoft called Azure DevOps, and Azure DevOps is being implemented. The features in Azure DevOps and Azure pipelines you may have heard of are being implemented in GitHub Actions. In fact, there's a public page you can go to see when different specific features of Azure DevOps are going to be implemented in GitHub Actions. But it's cool stuff. It's built on the market, and it's open source, so people can collaborate and contribute to that as well. So in GitHub Actions, we really have end-to-end code-to-cloud DevOps, and it manages and supports the whole software development lifecycle. And if you look on the right, yes, Azure is not limited to Azure. You can also deploy to AWS and Google Cloud Platform if you're doing multi-cloud and on-prem. So there's different ways to use GitHub Actions and some other tools we have to deploy things locally or to any of the major cloud platforms, especially Azure. So we have powerful, flexible CI/CD. It's integrated with GitHub, it's built in, and it triggers on certain activities that happen in your GitHub repo. Is it a commit? Is it a pull request? Different things you can activate based on the activity that's actually happening in your repo. We also have security built into the automation. Of course, when you're working with CI/CD, you don't necessarily want anyone to be able to deploy something to a production resource. So we do have the security, we have roles, and we have configurations built into it as well. And we also have community standards. So there's community standards, as I mentioned before, dependency management, and it is the largest DevOps ecosystem on earth. We have amazing contributors inside Microsoft and from third parties. We have, it's grown since 5 times since August 2019, so about a year ago. Yeah, last but not least, well, actually second to last but not least, increasing developer velocity. Social coding experience, most people, if they're looking for a job, I recommend a few things: a LinkedIn profile and a GitHub ID, because people want to know what you've been working on. They want to see what your activity is, and they can check out your code and your talent based on that. Now, there's a few things here that we have for community-powered collaboration, but the one thing I want to show you is Codespaces. So I'm going to start a demo here. I'm going to start it now, and I'm going to come back to it. And the reason why I do that is because it takes a couple minutes to start up. So here's a demo application I want to show you. And normally what you'd have to do, right, if you wanted to work with this, you'd probably have to fork it. And then you'd have to go in here and you'd have to get a copy of the location. And then you'd have to clone it. You have to clone it and then run it locally, see if it works. And then, oh, and maybe you have to set up new things in your environment, specific versions of dependencies and things like that. To make this work. And then if you want to later, you can use GitHub to post to your local fork, post to your upstream fork, and then issue a PR to the main code. What if we didn't have to do any of that? What if I could just go here and say, let's work with the code directly here in GitHub. And I can create a new code space, or I'm going to use one that I already created because that's just easier. So this actually creates a code space here in the web. If you look up here, I'm in a tab in my browser, and I've got something that looks like Visual Studio Code here, and it's actually loading up right now. If you see down here, it's activating some extensions and things. And what this does behind the scenes, it actually goes out to a central server. It grabs it's a Azure Container Registry that we have, similar to Docker Hub. It goes out and it grabs some code, and when it grabs that code, it puts it into the container, and it runs this pre-configured container with a few things in it already for me to go. And actually, it looks like it loaded up already, so I'll show you around here right now. I can look at different bash shells, so there's all kinds of shells, including PowerShell, but I can also, when I'm done making any changes here, here's my code. When I'm done making any changes here, I can fork it. I can push it up to my repo, because don't forget, this is on the web, but it's a separate instance. This is not actually my GitHub code. I still need to be able to push it to a repo and possibly have a pull request. For example, this is my sample code, simple stuff. How about if I go to Visual Studio Code? This is actually open source on GitHub, and I can actually open this with Codespaces. I'm not going to do it right now because it would take a little while and take up a little bit of space, but I can actually open this in Codespaces, play around with it, and then I don't have rights, of course, to push it directly to Codespaces. I would have to issue a PR for that. But for this one, I can just push it directly to Codespaces. So that's kind of cool. I can work with that. But let's say I want to have some extensions. One of the limitations of the web-based browser is it has these pre-installed extensions that you can use. But what if I want to use my local version of Visual Studio Code with all of my extensions already installed? So let's go over there and let's check that out. I'm going to close this. And I'll go to Visual Studio Code. Here's my Visual Studio Code. If I go down here, I can say, oh, it should say connect to Codespaces. Oh, it's already in there. I opened this earlier just to try it out. So it's already open. If I want to connect to a project, I can just go here. Oh, actually, no, it doesn't want to do it. Let me close it quick. It takes a second to start it up. All right. No, doesn't want to connect. Huh. Hey, anyway. Normally I can connect to Codespaces here. For some reason it doesn't do it right now. Okay, great demo, Brian. So let's go back here. Let's go to my repos. We'll just do it from here. But what I was going to show you is that you can actually do this directly from Visual Studio Code. And it will show you, it will have your local extensions and any pre-made extensions from that container that we're going to use. Anyway, let's open this with Codespaces over here. I don't know why I wouldn't do that. Huh. Close this down again. No, I think it's because it's already here. Nope. Doesn't like it. Never mind. But that's okay. Hey, Ron. Yeah, it's okay. So we're here. I've got the code here. So what I wanted to show was I wanted to show that I could do a stage and I could commit update from Codespaces on Joe Beat. I could commit that. Then I can do a sync, which is going to pull and push. And what it does is the sync. So don't forget, when I'm in here, I'm not editing the code in GitHub, as I mentioned before. I'm actually pushing it to, ask me later about that. I'm actually pushing it to my GitHub repo. So now, if I go back to my GitHub repo, here it is. If I go to Actions, I've got some actual triggers here. Inside this trigger is actually running a GitHub action. And inside that GitHub action, it's basically telling this to, it's checking this out. So it's checking out the code. This is going to build it with .NET. It's going to push it and it's going to deploy it to an Azure web app. And then I'm going to show you how that actually works after. How are we doing for time here? 1:48. Okay, so 4:48. Okay, I think we got 2 more minutes left.
Yeah, we got a few more minutes. Absolutely.
Okay, cool. I'm going to just go back here. So while that's running, it's going to deploy out to an app service, and I'll show you what that does in a minute. That's Codespaces, basically. You can code without compromise, and normally you do it from Visual Studio Code. I'm not sure why I wouldn't do it there. But normally that little thing that I dropped down, it would connect directly to Visual Studio Code, and you'll see the same environment, but it's remoting into a virtual machine that's running on GitHub, which is kind of cool. Last but not least, recruit, retain, and grow. So you can find the talent and skills you need by just searching GitHub for people who have done similar code to what you're looking for now. Also, one of the key features of GitHub is reducing new developer onboarding by up to 40%, because most people know GitHub already, so there's not really a big learning curve there. And there's a talent platform. GitHub itself has a learning lab you can use. And Microsoft Learn. I definitely need to mention that. Microsoft.com/learn is a great platform. And here's some resources you can use for that. Let me go back to my code and just make sure that went. Yeah, okay, cool. So the build and deploy works. So what it does, this is some code. If you look at my Visual Studio Code inside GitHub Workflows, I've got a YAML file, and the YAML file actually deploys to 2 different applications. I'm not going to go into what this does, but basically it does a build, it does a publish, and then it deploys to an Azure web app. If you want to check it out, it'll be in the resources for the links there. And let me show you the end result. So back in Actions here, and let's go to this one. Yeah, this one. Build and deploy. And we deploy to Azure web app, and it goes to this web app right here. The cool thing about that, it actually deployed to 2 different web apps, but it's just a simple app. If you notice this little beta up here, there's an A/B testing that I've got enabled here. And the way I did that was through a new feature called Azure Application Configuration. So if I go in here to my application configuration and I show you a feature manager, there is something called beta. And beta is set to 50%. So Microsoft percentage, so half the people who come and see this site are going to see the new beta version of the site, which has that beta menu, and half the people are going to see the other site. So it's an easy, simple way to set up A/B testing on a site too, and you can track this. And all of that was enabled. I didn't have to touch anything on my local machine. Everything came from GitHub. I edited it with Codespaces. I pushed it back to my GitHub repo, and the GitHub repo picked up the activity I was doing as a push and said, whenever this push happens, I'm supposed to do this build and deploy, and it deployed it out to the site. And inside the code is automatically built in the A/B testing. So kind of a cool way to do things, and just makes things easier for people. All right, so there's some resources here. I want to point you to the open source website. We do have the openness code of conduct. If you're looking for that, it's here as well. And please do sign up for a free trial if you're looking for one. And you can try open source on Azure. We have a bunch of different things there with Linux virtual machines and others. And you can look at customer references at http://customers.microsoft.com. And that is that.